Good morning. We are starting the book of Exodus today. And hey, if you've never joined us before, ever since COVID started, I started doing a daily Bible study. Used to do Saturdays, but just due to conferences, meetings, this is and that's, we just made it a Monday through Friday thing. And we've been discussing changing up the time we do it. That may happen in the very near future, but Monday through Friday, verse by verse. We did John, we did Acts, we did Revelation. We came back and did Genesis. We went back and just finished up Matthew. And here we are in the book of Exodus this morning. And so I'll be on my page every morning, going verse by verse. Thank you, Enrique. You like my IDF t-shirt. And so, all that said, we're going to start the book of Exodus today in verse 1, and today is going to be a bit of a history lesson because it's me, and I like history. So, verse 1 of Exodus, it says, "Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mightily, and the land was filled with them." So there's a lot of these guys now. "Now there arose a new king," or a new Pharaoh, "over Egypt, who did not know Joseph." So there we go. I wanted to get this far because today we're really just going to set the scene, and it's history. If you want to understand your Bible better, well, then I would exhort you, I'd recommend to you to learn your history. I've heard it attributed to a few people. I think J.I. Packer is probably the one I've heard it the most attributed to, that history is his story. God's the author of history. And I liked history in high school and whatnot and back in the day, but I love it now because I watch as history is intertwined and we put all these pieces together. So here's a few things to note, is that you actually can count backwards and do a lot of fascinating history stuff with timelines. For instance, they haven't been in Egypt as long as some assume. You actually find that 430 years before the Exodus, God gives the promise that his people are going to go down to Egypt and then be freed. It's 400 years from the time where Ishmael is mocking Isaac and those guys go their separate ways. Now, here's what's interesting, is that you'll find that Jacob, Israel, moves down to Egypt, right? Joseph was already down there, second in command to Pharaoh, 215 years before the Exodus. Jacob dies 198 years before the Exodus, and Joseph dies 144 years before the Exodus. And we know that Moses, who is 80 when the Exodus happens, we'll get there soon, right? He's 40 when he leaves the Midian, and he stays there 40 years and comes back at 80. So Moses is 80 years old at the Exodus. That actually means there's only 64 years in between the death of Joseph and the birth of Moses. Now, if we do our timelining, that all works out just about perfect. Something worth noting, this is all history, guys, and this is a cool way to start Exodus, and I love this. And some of you have already heard me share this in the past, but hopefully you'll commit more of it to memory. You see, Joseph came down to Egypt in the book of Genesis. You can flip back in Genesis and you can see the whole story. Really, you can go all the way back to chapter 39, where it talks about Joseph being a slave. He'd already been sold, and they take a little break. But what's interesting is it says Joseph been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites. Now, isn't it funny that you would specify that Potiphar was an Egyptian when they're in Egypt? Well, I think that's with good reason, because you see, history tells us that the 17th dynasty of Egypt, okay, the 17th dynasty would have been like 1500 BC or so. We're backing up to about when Moses, well, about a little before his birthday. And so this was a group called the Hyksos Kings, also known as the Shepherd Kings. These guys were shepherds. They were Semites. They were genetically, they're related to the Jews. And you can go Wikipedia this or whatever. This is not like, a secret. They came down from the area of Canaan, and they conquered Lower Egypt, which is on the north side, because it's lower and closer to the Mediterranean. So upper is south and lower is north. That's a little confusing maybe, but you have to think lower up north by the Mediterranean Sea. And they pushed the Egyptians down into Upper Egypt. And so at this point, Pharaoh from Genesis, the one whom Joseph interpreted his dreams, he would have actually been a Semite. He would have been genetically related to Joseph, distant cousins kind of a thing. But I mean, they weren't Egyptians. And we read in the Bible and know that the Egyptians hated shepherds. Well, these guys were ruling and reigning. They didn't mind taking in Joseph, taking in Jacob, Israel, taking in their whole family and putting them up in Egypt. But in 1560 BC, so if you're a nerd and you like to write these down, feel free. I actually added the dates this morning, because I've never added the dates. I had the dynasty in my Bible, but on my book of Exodus, in my Bible, I have these notes to help me remember. The 18th dynasty starts in 1560. The Upper Egypt, true Egyptians, came down into Lower Egypt, and they reconquered the land, so that Upper and Lower Egypt was now back under Egyptian control. It all began with Amenhotep I, and then he had his son, Thutmose I. And I don't think you guys want all the dates, but I've got them all. And after Thutmose I, in 1514, took over his son, Thutmose II. And this is where our story gets interesting. Thutmose II, once again, you can Wikipedia all this. It's not top secret stuff. He was actually engaged to his younger sister. And so he marries his sister, Hatshepsut. Now, she would have been married right around 12 to 14 years old. Getting married to your brother as an early teen is no girl's dream, huh? Well, here's the thing, though. If you run your timeline from the year of the Exodus in 1446, and you back it up 80 years to the birth of Moses, it's right about the time that this guy Thutmose is getting married to his younger sister, Hatshepsut. Now, Hatshepsut would have been the princess at the time, because remember, she's marrying him, so she's the queen later, but at first, she's the princess. Thutmose II and Hatshepsut never have any children of their own, though Thutmose II does have an illegitimate child through a harem woman who they end up naming Thutmose III. Well, Thutmose II dies young, and Hatshepsut becomes Pharaoh. She reigns for, I think, over 20 years. I can look down here and see. Yeah. Just over 20 years she reigns, and she becomes the longest reigning woman pharaoh in Egyptian history. She was extremely powerful, and actually the nation flourished under her. Now, if we start putting this together with our Bible timeline as we start reading, and I think most of us are familiar with the Exodus story, but timeline-wise, just going off of dates, 1446 Exodus, backing up 80 years, it's right when she was a young girl. I think she was the young girl who pulled young Moses out of the water, out of the Nile. Now, here's the interesting thing, is right about when Moses was a young man, we find that Thutmose III takes over. Now, likely, taking what Josephus wrote, if you've seen the Ten Commandments, the movie with Charlton Heston, you could tell that there was this like brotherly rivalry. There was the son of Thutmose II who wanted claim to the throne. You have Hatshepsut who's on the throne, and you have her adopted son, whom she probably would have liked to see on the throne. And here are these two young men who would be battling essentially for that position. Well, she dies, and you would find that not much longer after that, Moses flees off into Midian. And so we have Moses fleeing during the reign of Thutmose III. Now, if you look up in history, you'll find that Thutmose III, unlike other pharaohs, he sent numerous conquests into the land of Canaan, like wave after wave after wave of soldiers scouring the land of Canaan, almost like they were looking for someone or something. If you've been to Israel, or if you plan on going to Israel real soon, when you get to go to the city of Scythopolis, which is the ancient Israeli city, that's one of the Decapolis. You read about the Decapolis in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it was Bet-Shan. This is where King Saul, his body was hung after he was killed on Mount Gilboa. They brought him to Bet-Shan. At that point, the Philistines had conquered. But this city, Bet-Shan, it's actually up by the Galilee. So we're talking like north of Jerusalem, all the way. It's just on the south side of the Sea of Galilee. If you go there today and you climb up to the top of this hill, you actually find an Egyptian outpost. The ancient remains of an Egyptian outpost, which had been like a headquarters for military operations. You can go read the plaque. I'm the guy who always leads people on the hike up to the little Egyptian outpost. And that said, you go read the plaque, and it was that outpost under the reign of Thutmose III. So this guy, Thutmose III, who would have been raised up in the palace the same time as Moses, Moses disappears and no one knows where he goes. We'll get to that in like the next chapter. But Thutmose sends all these troops up north, and then he dies in 1450. And what we find is in 1450, he dies, his son, Amenhotep II, comes to reign, and 4 years later is the Exodus. What we'll find in the biblical account. We read in verse 8, a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph came in. Well, I think that was Amenhotep I, the 18th dynasty. When the new dynasty started, the Hyksos kings who were favorable of the Jews, they weren't there anymore. And now true Egyptians came in. They didn't like the Jews, so they put them to slavery. When Moses goes into his hiding in Midian, which I think they assumed he went back to Canaan, his home, but he didn't. He headed over to Midian. You'll find that God tells him, the old Pharaoh is gone, and there's a new Pharaoh. You can come back now and try and deal with this new Pharaoh. So Amenhotep II, whom is the Pharaoh of all the 10 commandments, the 10 plagues and all that, that was the son of Moses' guy. You have to think about Moses is 80 now, so this is the son. So the son knows who Moses is, but it's not his dad. And here's this, I'm going to finish up a little history for you guys, and then we'll wrap it all back around. If you just Wikipedia Amenhotep II, what's fascinating about him, his father, Thutmose III, was known for these massive military conquests all up and down Canaan. And yet, Amenhotep II, history has no record of military conquest. And the scholars are often baffled by this, wondering why did he not go and do any, like there's just no record of him going to battle anywhere. And it's almost like he didn't have an army, like it got destroyed in the Red Sea. And lastly, of the important names, if you want all the names, after Amenhotep II, Thutmose V, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and then Tutankhaten after that, i.e. King Tut. He comes just a few generations after all of this. 2 more guys after him before the 19th dynasty with Ramses. But listen to this about Thutmose IV. I'm sure all of us are familiar with the Sphinx, right? It's got the 2 big things, the big head, broken nose, needs a nose job. The Sphinx. If you look at a picture of the Sphinx, right here, there's a big old plaque in front of the Sphinx. I know that plaque has a more technical name, but it's also known commonly as the Dream Steely. Now, Steely is just an archaeological term for a rock with writing on it. So, the Dream Steely. Well, it's a stele about a dream. Thutmose IV made this as a memorial because he had a dream. He believed that the god, I think it was Ra, Osiris, one of the Egyptian gods, I don't memorize every fact, came to him in his sleep and told him that you would become Pharaoh. Now that might seem insignificant to you at first, but if you read what archaeologists comment on this, if you were the heir, this dream would be pointless, wouldn't it? I mean, you know you're going to be Pharaoh. But if you were not the firstborn son, if you were a second-born son, well, this dream would be of significance. For some reason, your older brother would not reign. It would be you who would actually reign. And so, without any thoughts of the Bible or the book of Exodus, if you go to Wikipedia, pick your Encyclopedia Britannica, pick your traditional history source, they'll tell you that logically, archaeologists believe that Thutmose IV was not Amenhotep's firstborn son, and that his firstborn son probably died. Well, again, we pair this up with the Bible, and we find with the 10 plagues of Egypt, Amenhotep II's firstborn son, well, he dies in the 10th plague. And Thutmose IV ends up reigning instead. All these dates, all these names, what I can say is this. I find it cool because, again, history is his story. God's got control of it all. And I love to watch how you can open up your Encyclopedia Britannica and you can open up your Bible, and just with a little bit of digging and maybe a little bit of help and guidance from the guys who've gone before us, you can start seeing how all the pieces just fall together. So yeah, I think Hatshepsut was the princess who pulls Moses out of the Nile. I think Amenhotep II is the Pharaoh who loses his firstborn son in the plagues and loses his army and therefore does not conquer, like his dad Thutmose III, which seemed to have some reason he continually was attacking the land of Canaan, like he had some kind of a grudge against someone he thought was hiding there. But now we back up. I've taken us a good 10 chapters forward at the book of Exodus, and we just know that the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons, they're in Egypt, and there is now a new king, a new Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph. And he's going to create a lot of problems. And so, yeah, we're going to dig into it starting tomorrow. So hopefully you guys liked this historical introduction to the book. Kind of nerdy, kind of historically, much less Bible than I hope we get every other week. I hope every other week is a lot more Bible and a lot less, other thoughts. But it's cool stuff. So there you guys go. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Also, I'll just mention, yesterday I took a poll on what time we should start. I gave it twice. At the beginning, 2 people voted that we should start earlier. I gave it again, and I didn't realize that as soon as the video stopped, I couldn't see the results of the poll. So I don't know what anyone else voted the second time around. So starting at 7 a.m., 6:45, 7:15, I don't know. I'm not going to make a change quite yet, but I'm going to be asking around and seeing what people think. So 7:30 tomorrow morning, I'll see you here. And then if I am going to change times, I'll give you all a good heads up. God bless you guys. Have an amazing day. And I will see you all tomorrow. Prayer tonight, Psalm 30 and 31, Revival Church. God bless.